Welcome, friend. Tonight we drift into 100 Death Note facts to fall asleep, to a quiet descent through the shadows of justice, power, and the fragile line between what we call good and what we choose to do. As the night settles around you, let the story unfold in whispers and reflections, not loud or sharp, but slow and steady, like ink spreading across a page. We will wander through the origins of the Death Note, through the minds of Light and L, through the gods who watch without mercy, and the humans who dream of being gods themselves. These facts are not just details. They are fragments of a world built on thought, consequence, and the dangerous beauty of control. You may feel the weight of philosophy here, but it will move softly, carried by long sentences that drift like smoke. If you're listening before sleep, let your breathing match the rhythm of the story, and let your thoughts dissolve into its calm darkness. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, the city, the hour, the quiet room where this story finds you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you can return to these worlds whenever dreams feel too far away. Fact 1. Before Death Note became the story of gods and justice, it was just an idea. In a sketchbook, a quiet concept about what a human would do if given divine power, a thought Tsugumi Oba described not as inspiration but as curiosity, the wondering of whether goodness could survive responsibility. And in that single thought, the seed of an empire was planted, small and unassuming, growing into a universe where morality is not absolute but fluid, where right and wrong bend under the weight of intention, showing that the moment you decide what is just, you begin to lose the ability to see clearly. Fact 2. The first Death Note one-shot, published in Weekly Shonen Jump before serialization, told a different story entirely. It followed a boy named Taro Kagami who finds the notebook, uses it sparingly, and returns it to the Shinigami after learning that even justified death brings no satisfaction. And though Light Yagami had not yet been imagined, the one-shot carried the same heartbeat, the same question pulsing under every panel. What does a human do when no one is watching? When judgment is absolute and consequences delayed? When power becomes the only language left between desire and regret? Fact 3. Takeshi Obata, the artist whose style would define the series' cold precision, designed Light and L to be mirrors, opposites drawn from the same reflection. Light, sharp, composed, symmetrical, L unkempt, curved, and off balance. And yet together they form the visual equation that drives the series. Order and chaos, symmetry and entropy, both framed within Obata's deliberate contrast of light and shadow, his use of harsh black inks to trap emotion in stillness, creating a mood where even silence feels heavy, every line purposeful, every shadow whispering that morality, like art, is nothing without contrast. Fact 4. Ryuk, the Shinigami who begins and ends the story, was never meant to be a villain but an observer, a being outside human emotion, driven not by evil but boredom, embodying the idea that divine power without empathy becomes a kind of emptiness, a void that watches creation as if it were theater. And in that detachment, Ryuk becomes both the narrator and the audience, laughing not out of cruelty but understanding, knowing that humans, given the power to judge, will always destroy themselves, trying to define perfection, making him not the god of death, but the god of inevitability. Fact 5. The Death Note itself, with its endless rules, is the purest metaphor in the story, a book that claims to grant control, but instead becomes a record of obsession, a mirror that writes back, teaching its owner not about death but about themselves. Each rule a test of patience, curiosity, and ego, and though it appears as an object of power, its true strength lies in its neutrality, because the notebook never lies, never chooses, never forgives. It only reflects, showing that the corruption is not in the ink, but in the hand that writes, and the heart that decides. Fact 6. The series' central theme, justice, was never meant to be defined, only questioned. Oba wrote light as the embodiment of human idealism taken to its breaking point, a boy who believed he could perfect the world if only he removed its flaws, while L represented the skepticism that perfection itself is corruption, disguised as logic, and together they form the argument that morality cannot exist without opposition, that the act of defining good creates its opposite, that even righteousness becomes tyranny once it stops listening, proving that justice is not balance but struggle, eternal and unresolved. Fact 7. Behind every Shinigami's indifference lies a faint echo of humanity. In the world beyond life, where death is routine and immortality dull, each god of death is cursed, not with guilt, but with apathy. They cannot die, but they cannot feel either, and so they drop notebooks into the human world, like pebbles into still water, watching the ripples with fascination, not knowing whether they want destruction or meaning, only that boredom is worse than sin. Ryuk's grin hides that melancholy, his laughter the only sound in a place where silence has lasted for eternity. Fact 8. Oba's decision to make Light a high school student was not to make him relatable, but to make him pure, untainted by life's compromises, untouched by failure, a blank slate of potential, intellect, and arrogance, the perfect vessel for exploring what happens when idealism meets temptation. Light's youth is his flaw, his certainty his downfall, and his intellect his cage. Through him, the story asks whether knowledge without empathy is the truest form of ignorance, and in his hands, the notebook becomes not a divine weapon, but the reflection of every bright, well-intentioned mind that believes control can equal salvation. Fact 9. Every rule of the Death Note was crafted to sustain the illusion of control, from the required name and face to the cause of death clause, each line written as both promise and warning. Oba once said he added new rules simply to see how readers would react, knowing that complexity itself could create a false sense of mastery, that the more humans understood the notebook, the more they would believe they could outsmart it, and in that belief lay the trap. The notebook never breaks its rules, but the humans who wield it always do, because faith in systems is just another form of blindness. Fact 10. From its very first chapter to its final frame, Death Note was never about death. It was about consequence, about how easily the human desire to make sense of suffering becomes cruelty disguised as order. The world Light tried to build was not evil by design but by logic, and the gods who watched him were not divine but mirrors, reflecting the truth that no one can play God without becoming their own first victim. And when Ryuk finally writes Light's name, it is not punishment, not justice, but release, the end of a story that was always a circle, closing softly, perfectly, inevitably. Fact 11. Light, Yagami's handwriting, crisp, confident, and deliberate, became one of the most powerful symbols of the series, because every stroke carried both control and arrogance, every letter written as if it were proof of his superiority, the physical manifestation of his self-image as the world's arbiter. Takeshi Obata designed it to contrast with L's messy scrawl, showing that even written language could be a moral reflection, Light's order disguising ego, L's chaos concealing honesty. The handwriting, like the Death Note itself, is performance, every letter a mask, every word a judgment disguised as elegance. Fact 12. The first few chapters of Death Note were drawn almost entirely in grayscale with stark shadows, an intentional choice to make the story feel airless, tight, and enclosed, mirroring the suffocation of moral certainty. Obata used heavy blacks around Light's eyes as the series progressed, not just to convey madness, but to make his face physically darker with each moral transgression. Meanwhile, L remained pale and soft-lit, drawn with washed-out tones to suggest spiritual neutrality, neither angel nor devil, only observer. This contrast became the heartbeat of the art itself. Clarity fighting opacity, innocence dissolving into sophistication. Fact 13. Ryuk's apple, the most iconic symbol in the series, was not a random quirk, but a deliberate biblical echo. The apple represents temptation, curiosity, the first act of disobedience, the sweetness of forbidden knowledge. Oba later said that Ryuk's craving for apples was his way of showing how gods envy human sensation, taste, texture, the experience of something temporary. For Ryuk, apples are a reminder that even immortality lacks flavor, that without mortality there can be no pleasure. Every time he takes a bite, the story whispers that knowing everything makes the world tasteless. Fact 14. L's habit of crouching, his knees tucked close, his toes gripping the chair, came from a psychological note Obata added to his design. He reasoned that L, with his isolation and analytical mind, would minimize his body space to feel control in a world that overwhelms him. It's the posture of someone who lives in his own head, someone who trusts gravity only when he can feel it directly. Oba confirmed later that L burns more calories sitting like that, a strange fact rooted in realism, showing how even genius is anchored by fragile humanity. Fact 15. The voice actors of the anime, Mamoru Miyano, Light, and Kappei Yamaguchi, L, shaped the emotional rhythm of the adaptation. Miyano's delivery was precise and theatrical, his voice turning Light's thoughts into sermons, while Yamaguchi gave L's lines an uneven, curious quality, as if every sentence was a question to himself. Their performances were recorded separately at times to emphasize the feeling that they lived in different moral worlds, two minds speaking across an invisible divide. When they finally met face to face in the story, the contrast of their voices created a sonic mirror: logic versus belief. Fact 16. The Shinigami world was built from discarded ideas, a realm neither heaven nor hell, more like an afterthought of creation. Obata designed it to look like an endless junkyard of souls, its architecture fragmented, floating, grotesque, yet beautiful. Every object there seems half forgotten, much like the gods who inhabit it. Ryuk's design came from sketches of medieval plague doctors and crows, while Rem's softer, skeletal appearance reflected compassion hidden within decay. The world itself moves without sunlight, a place where time feels circular, showing that immortality is not freedom, but repetition without end. Fact 17. Oba wrote every rule of the Death Note as if it were law, clean, precise, without emotion, to create the illusion that morality could be codified. But the irony of the story is that the more rules there are, the less control anyone actually has. Each clause is a loophole waiting to be found, each limit an invitation to cheat. Humanity, the story suggests, cannot live inside perfect order. It must find imperfection to feel alive. The notebook becomes scripture, and Light becomes its prophet, a boy who believes that obedience to written words equals truth. Fact 18. The character of Light. Yagami was not inspired by villains, but by tragic heroes, characters who mistake destiny for duty. Oba cited Macbeth and Ozymandias as literary parallels, men who sought greatness and became monuments to their own ruin. Light's genius was his tragedy, not his strength. He could see the mechanics of morality but not its heart, and every life he judged brought him further from the humanity he claimed to protect. His story was never about ambition. It was about loneliness, the loneliness of those who believe only they can fix what is broken. Fact 19. The ending of Death Note was written 3 different times before Oba chose the published version. In one draft, Light wins not through cunning, but through surrender, becoming a silent god that the world forgets. In another, he dies quietly in prison, no one remembering him. But the final choice, his death in the street, reaching out to a phantom vision of El, was the most human. It turned the divine narrative back into tragedy, reminding readers that no one escapes the judgment of their own conscience, that even gods die longing to be understood. Fact 20. In the very last panels of the manga, we see a gathering of hooded figures holding candles, their faces hidden, their purpose uncertain. Some readers saw this as the birth of a cult worshipping Kira, others saw it as mourning. Oba never confirmed either interpretation. He said only that humans need something to believe in, even after the truth destroys them. The light of those candles flickers quietly, illuminating nothing and everything at once. The final image of a world still searching for justice, still reaching into the dark for answers that may not exist. Fact 21. The Shinigami realm exists outside human time, a place where decay never finishes, where every moment is both eternity and stasis. Its creation was meant to reflect the stagnation of beings who no longer fear death, creatures so ancient that even memory has dulled into instinct. Ryuk and the others do not truly live, they drift. Their world is a museum of exhaustion, built from remnants of mortal imagination, where nothing grows and nothing ends. It is not hell, but boredom incarnate, a quiet warning that immortality without change becomes indistinguishable from despair. Fact 22. Ryuk's design went through more than 20 drafts before Obata found the perfect balance between horror and charm. Early versions were skeletal, too monstrous to feel intelligent. Later sketches softened him into something almost human, but it lacked menace. The final Ryuk, with his bird-like grin, glowing eyes, and human posture, captures both comedy and death in a single frame. Obata called him a fallen observer, a creature of contradictions, who is at once grotesque and fascinating, terrifying yet oddly relatable, a reminder that even the ugliest truths can smile if you learn to look long enough. Fact 23. Rem, the other major Shinigami, was designed as a deliberate contrast, not cruel, but maternal, her compassion distorted by the logic of her nature. She loves not because she understands humans, but because she envies them. When she sacrifices herself for Misa, it is not an act of divine rebellion, but of longing, the only form of feeling left to a god who cannot die naturally. Her body disintegrates in peace, her form dissolving into light, and in that quiet ending, she becomes the first Shinigami to prove that love is stronger than law. Fact 24. The Shinigami eyes, perhaps the most haunting element of the story, symbolize the temptation to control life's final mystery. They offer truth, but at the cost of time, reducing one's lifespan by half. This exchange transforms curiosity into a slow self-destruction, a contract disguised as empowerment. Misa's decision to accept them twice shows not greed, but devotion. She gives away her future for love, proving that knowledge is never neutral. The eyes are mirrors turned inward, Every person who looks through them sees their own limits, reflected back, bright and cruel. Fact 25. Oba described the Shinigami eyes as the perfect sin because they remove the human need to guess, replacing empathy with certainty. To see a lifespan is to destroy wonder, to know the ending of every story before it begins. In this way, they are not gifts, but punishments, showing that omniscience erases beauty. Light rejects them not because he is wise, but because he believes he deserves to live forever. Misa accepts them because she believes she doesn't. And in that contrast, Death Note captures two sides of mortality, pride and surrender, both equally human. Fact 26. Ryuk's name carries hidden symbolism. In Japanese, Ryu means dragon, a creature of ancient chaos, while the added K softens it, turning him from beast to trickster. The name was chosen for its sound rather than meaning, but the associations linger. Ryuk as a bringer of change, neither savior nor destroyer, a myth reborn as curiosity. His laughter throughout the series, those long, echoing ha-ha-has, was scripted carefully, meant to sound amused but hollow. The voice of someone laughing not because things are funny, but because he has forgotten how to react to anything else. Fact 27. The Shinigami King, the unseen ruler of death, appears only briefly in the manga, his form vast and grotesque, adorned with countless watches, symbols of every human life he oversees. He embodies the final bureaucracy of existence, a god so detached that even eternity has become paperwork. Oba and Obata left his purpose deliberately vague, saying only that he exists because death needs administration. The king's realm is order without meaning, a place where time ticks forever but never moves forward, reflecting the story's central fear that even gods may be prisoners of their own creation. Fact 28. The design of the Shinigami language, seen on the first page of the notebook, was created by Obata as a cipher based loosely on Norse runes and ancient cursive. It has no direct translation. Every symbol is aesthetic rather than phonetic, yet it feels ancient because of its rhythm and repetition. It reminds the reader that power often hides behind the illusion of sacred language, that mystery itself can command obedience. The Shinigami script, illegible but orderly, becomes a silent testament to the human need to believe that what cannot be read must still mean something. Fact 29. In the anime's musical score, composed by Yoshihisa Hirano and Hideki Taniguchi, the Shinigami theme is built from choirs layered over dissonant organs, a sound designed to mimic eternity too long, too unresolved, echoing even after the scene ends. The music acts as Ryuk's unseen laughter, drifting through each episode. Hirano said he wanted the score to sound like a church built underwater, where holiness and decay coexist, where beauty feels both sacred and suffocating. The music doesn't mourn or celebrate death, it suspends it, letting each note hover like a judgment yet to fall. Fact 30. The Shinigami world, though visually alien, is a metaphor for the human condition, a space filled with beings who cannot die but have forgotten how to live, trapped in a loop of endless existence. Their apathy mirrors the modern world's quiet despair, comfort without purpose, abundance without meaning. When Ryuk drops the notebook into the human realm, it is not a curse but an experiment, a spark thrown into stagnant water. His grin, as he watches chaos unfold, is not cruelty, it is recognition, because even gods envy the fragile beauty of mortals who still have something to lose. Fact 31. The duel between Light and L begins not with confrontation, but with curiosity, two minds circling each other like reflections in a dark mirror, both fascinated by the other's existence, both aware that the game can only end when one ceases to think. Their battle is not of strength but of precision, their weapons not swords but silence, deduction, and timing. Each move is an act of self-definition, each pause a confession. Oba called their relationship a conversation disguised as a war, and that war, more than any titan or god, defined the rhythm of the human mind under pressure. Fact 32. Light's public persona, charming, composed, radiant, was drawn deliberately to resemble a political candidate. His posture and gestures in the manga mimic those of speakers on a stage, every smile rehearsed, every movement calculated to project both humility and control. In contrast, L's body language collapses inward, slouched, barefoot, detached as if the weight of truth bends him. Their first meeting over coffee becomes one of the most layered moments in anime history. Light performing divinity, L performing humanity, both aware that performance itself is the battlefield. Fact 33. The tennis match between Light and L is not merely sport but dialogue. Their volleys choreographed to mirror their arguments, each serve a hypothesis, each return a counterpoint. Obata framed the panels so that their faces and the ball align, symbolizing how truth itself is passed back and forth, impossible to hold. The sweat on Light's face, the tension in L's hands, all serve to make intellect physical, visible, beautiful. It is the most honest conversation they ever have, because for once they are not hiding behind words, only instinct and rhythm. Fact 34. L's love of sweets was not a quirk for humor, but a metaphor for his understanding of life, fleeting pleasure amid endless analysis. He eats to stay grounded, to remind himself that sensation still exists beyond deduction. Oba described it as the mind's rebellion against logic, a simple human indulgence that keeps him tethered to the world he observes but cannot join. When he bites into sugar cubes and cakes, it's not greed but the smallest act of hope, proof that even in a life spent dissecting morality, sweetness still matters. Fact 35. Light's decision to join L's investigation team marks the point where his mask and his identity begin to blur. He steps willingly into the light of suspicion, confident that intellect can hide guilt. The irony is profound. The closer he gets to justice, the further he drifts from innocence. Oba described it as the paradox of the righteous criminal, the belief that proximity to truth can erase sin. Light's smile during those meetings isn't confidence, it's exhaustion hidden beneath brilliance, the smile of a man who already knows he's building his own trap. Fact 36. The surveillance sequence in Light's home remains one of the most masterful depictions of paranoia ever drawn. Cameras fill every corner, but what makes the scene powerful is not the invasion, but Light's adaptation. His composure becomes a mask within a mask. The potato chip scene, absurd on the surface, is actually tragedy in miniature. A boy performing normalcy so perfectly that it becomes monstrous. He eats to appear human, studies to appear innocent, kills to appear right. The performance becomes reality until the line between justice and showmanship dissolves entirely. Fact 37. The symbolism of names, the power to define existence, runs quietly beneath every interaction between Light and L. Light, whose name means illumination, seeks to shine judgment on the world. L, a single letter, represents anonymity, the refusal to be categorized. Their conflict is linguistic as much as moral, Light expanding endlessly into godhood, L contracting into mystery. When one dies, language itself breaks balance. Light's words become declarations, no longer challenged, while L's silence becomes prophecy. The story reminds us that knowledge without resistance becomes tyranny, even in thought. Fact 38. The handcuff arc, where Light and L are physically bound together, was Obata's idea. He wanted their rivalry to become literal intimacy, their coexistence forced until it became unbearable. The chain symbolizes dependency. Neither can function without the other. When they walk side by side, their steps unconsciously match, showing how hatred can mimic love, how obsession erases individuality. The handcuffs glitter in sunlight, turning bondage into ornament, proof that even connection can become confinement when it is built on control. Fact 39. L's death scene, quiet, unceremonious, unscored, was one of the most controversial moments in the series. Oba chose silence deliberately. He wanted the audience to feel absence, not tragedy. L dies, not as martyr or victim, but as human, his final gesture touching Light's face, echoing compassion, recognition, perhaps forgiveness. He smiles faintly, seeing at last the reflection of the monster and the boy in the same gaze. It is the moment the story loses its conscience and the world begins to drift towards something colder. Fact 40. After L's death, the rain begins, a soft, steady rain that fills the city with reflections. Obata drew each droplet as if the world itself were weeping, not for L alone, but for balance lost. Light stands in that rain, victorious, but untouched by water. His face, once alive with curiosity, becomes still, glass-like. The storm does not cleanse him, it passes through him, and in that stillness, the reader feels what Ryuk always knew, that gods are not born in thunder, but in silence, in the moment when no one is left to say no. Fact 41. Misa Amane enters the story like light through a crack in a cold room, vivid, impulsive, and filled with faith so fierce that it blinds her. She is both contrast and mirror to Light Yagami, her devotion reflecting his arrogance in softer tones. Where Light kills for ideology, Misa kills for love, believing that affection justifies any sin. Oba described her as the purest sinner, a girl who mistakes worship for purpose. Her every smile is an act of surrender, her every breath a prayer to someone who sees her only as a tool in his divine design. Fact 42. Misa's status as a celebrity, a model adored by millions, serves as one of Death Note's sharpest ironies. She lives under constant public attention, yet her truest self is hidden behind secrecy and fear. In a story obsessed with visibility, she embodies the paradox of fame, to be seen by everyone and understood by no one. The notebook gives her power, but it also erases her identity, reducing her to a shadow orbiting Light's brilliance. She is, in the end, a ghost who still breathes, defined entirely by the gaze of those who look at her. Fact 43. When Misa gains the Shinigami eyes, she becomes both all-seeing and blind. Her ability to know the names and fates of others erases her capacity to wonder. She looks at faces and sees only endings. The gift destroys curiosity, leaving only inevitability. Oba once said that Misa's tragedy lies in her loyalty. She offers half her life twice, never realizing that the true cost is not time but imagination, the slow fading of mystery. To know when others will die is to stop believing in surprise, and without surprise, even love loses its meaning. Fact 44. Rem's relationship with Misa redefines what it means to love in a world without warmth. Rem's care is not maternal or romantic, it is existential. She loves Misa because Misa feels, because emotion itself is divine to a creature who cannot truly feel. Her decision to sacrifice herself for Misa's safety is not rebellion but evolution. In that act, the Shinigami becomes human, not through mortality, but through compassion. The scene glows with paradox, death, birthing empathy, silence breaking into grace. It's the series' only untainted love, a god's quiet surrender to a mortal's fragile heart. Fact 45. Misa's obsession with light is not simply romantic fixation, it's survival. Her backstory, watching her parents' murderer escape justice, left her hollow, searching for someone who could make sense of chaos. Light's cold certainty filled that void. She saw in him a divine order, mistaking his calculation for compassion. Her adoration is less about affection than it is about faith. She worships him as proof that morality can be absolute. And yet, the deeper she believes, the smaller she becomes, until love erases her name from her own story. Fact 46. The duality between Misa and light mirrors the Shinigami's world and the human one. She acts from emotion, he from intellect. Oba used them as opposing pillars to test the balance of power and vulnerability. Misa's decisions are impulsive but honest, Light's rational but hollow. Together, they form a circle, one that begins with admiration and ends with betrayal. Their relationship is a study in manipulation disguised as destiny, proof that devotion without reciprocity always becomes tragedy. When Misa calls Light her everything, she doesn't realize he's already erased the part of himself that could love anything. Fact 47. Rem's death is one of the most symbolic moments in Death Note. As she disintegrates into dust, saving Misa by killing L and Watari, her form dissolves not with despair, but serenity. She becomes the story's only deity to die willingly, her destruction an act of love that restores the balance the humans lost. In contrast to Ryuk's apathy, Rem proves that even death gods can evolve. Her final smile, faint, gentle, unrecorded, is the quiet opposite of Light's triumphant smirk. Where he kills to be eternal, she dies to feel alive. Fact 48. Misa's gradual loss of memory, after relinquishing the Death Note, parallels the shedding of innocence and identity. Her blankness is almost peaceful, her mind emptied of the chaos that once defined her. She becomes a symbol of what it means to forget that sometimes mercy lies not in remembering but in release. Oba described her as a living ghost, one who walks between divinity and oblivion, between love and the silence after it. When she smiles in later scenes, it's not joy but habit, the reflex of someone who once loved so deeply she lost her name. Fact 49. Misa's return to fame after the time skip is hollow victory. Her beauty endures, her popularity grows, but the soul beneath has faded. She exists as an echo, living on the surface while her heart remains trapped in a memory she can no longer recall. The bright lights of her career contrast sharply with the darkness of her past, showing how success often conceals sorrow. Every photo shoot, every commercial smile becomes an act of performance, the illusion of a girl who seems alive, even though her purpose has already vanished with Light's affection. Fact 50. The final implication of Misa's story, her unseen death after Light's fall, lingers as one of the series' quietest heartbreaks. The anime hints at her suicide through a single haunting frame, a girl on a snowy rooftop, hair drifting in the wind, eyes calm as if greeting something familiar. There is no sound, no monologue, no spectacle, only stillness. It is not despair, but completion, the last act of a love story where devotion becomes destiny and as the snow falls softly around her, the world seems to sigh, as though grief itself were finally tired of speaking. Fact 51. After L's death, the story of Death Note shifts into inheritance. Two children born of intellect, Near and Mellow, fragments of L's divided soul made flesh. Oba described them as extensions of the same question, not successors but reflections of what L could have become if emotion or discipline had dominated his heart. Near is the calm of reason stripped of empathy, Mellow the storm of passion freed from restraint, and together they form the incomplete echo of their predecessor. They do not replace him. They prove that genius without balance will always fracture. Fact 52. Near's environment, a sterile white room filled with toys, mirrors his inner world. It is order without warmth, logic without life. He constructs meaning through patterns, stacking towers and puzzles as if rebuilding a universe that makes sense. Every toy is both comfort and control, a metaphor for his worldview where chaos must be contained through arrangement. His expression rarely changes because emotion to him is inefficiency. He is what light once dreamed of being, intellect, untouched by doubt. But in that purity, there is hollowness. Understanding without compassion is only another form of blindness. Fact 53. Mellow's world, by contrast, burns in gold and red, a palette of impulsivity, fire, and risk. He operates on instinct, driven by pride and hunger for recognition. Where Near sees systems, Mellow sees narratives. He wants not perfection, but meaning. His scars, literal and emotional, are badges of devotion to the truth, however brutal. Oba called him the necessary chaos, the reminder that emotion drives action when logic cannot. Together, Near and Mellow are the two halves of humanity's mind, reason, and will, both necessary, both doomed to conflict, both born from the same void. Fact 54. The existence of Near and Mellow after L's fall gives Death Note its mythic shape, the idea that ideas themselves reincarnate. Justice does not die with one man. It mutates, evolves, fragments. Wami's house, the orphanage that raised them, becomes not sanctuary but laboratory, a place where morality is trained like a skill. The children there learn deduction before empathy, logic before love. It is where potential replaces innocence. The series subtly asks whether such genius is blessing or curse, whether intellect born in isolation can ever truly understand the hearts it seeks to judge. Fact 55. Mellow's choice to join the mafia is often read as rebellion, but it is really confession. He knows that his brilliance without connection will destroy him, so he chooses a world where imperfection rules. He surrounds himself with noise, corruption, humanity, all the things Near rejects. It is not morality he seeks, but feeling. His life becomes the counter-argument to Near's detachment. Every reckless act, every scar, every decision born of pride makes him human in ways light and Near can never be. In his chaos lies the only truth that intellect alone cannot touch: empathy. Fact 56. Near's method of investigation differs from L's in one crucial way. He believes not in individuals but in systems. He manipulates organizations, not people. His genius is administrative, institutional. He builds justice like an equation. Yet, by removing himself from emotion, he also removes the moral tension that gave L depth. When Near eventually traps light, it is not victory born of understanding, but of structure, a machine outthinking a man. Oba later said he wanted the reader to feel both satisfaction and emptiness, because triumph without compassion is indistinguishable from loss. Fact 57. Melo's death, fiery and abrupt, feels inevitable, but it completes the balance between intellect and instinct. His sacrifice provides Nier with the information necessary to corner Light, proving that emotion, risk, and imperfection are essential to progress. Melo dies in pursuit of meaning, not perfection, and in doing so, he restores the humanity that Nier lacked. The way his chocolate melts in his final scene, a detail drawn with slow precision, symbolizes transience, sweetness, and decay. The genius who lived by impulse ends in flame, but his death gives Light's world its final fracture. Fact 58. The final confrontation between Nier and Light is written like a sermon in reverse, a courtroom stripped of divinity where logic replaces faith and evidence replaces belief. Light's words, once confident, turn frantic, his monologue crumbling under the weight of reality. Nier's calm dismantling of his illusion is not anger, but mercy. He exposes Kira not as god or genius, but as a frightened boy who mistook admiration for destiny. The quiet that follows is not victory's roar, but awakening the moment when the myth dissolves and only the trembling truth remains. Fact 59. Light's breakdown in the final chapter is a mirror of his beginning. The boy who once wrote names with surgical grace now screams his own into the void, his logic unraveling like torn paper. Obata drew the panels with claustrophobic framing, the walls closing in, each line tilting, destabilizing. Ryuk's looming presence becomes reminder and reflection. This was always the ending. The Death Note never grants control. It only postpones consequence. Light's fall is not punishment from gods, but the natural gravity of human arrogance returning to earth. His scream is the sound of divinity collapsing into mortality. Fact 60. Nier's victory brings no peace, only proof that the cycle continues. He solves the puzzle but inherits the burden. The final image of him stacking dice, calm and detached, mirrors Light's early posture, the same stillness, the same certainty. The notebook is gone, but the idea remains. In every world, another will find it, another will write, another will believe they can perfect creation. Oba ends not with closure but recursion, the eternal recurrence of justice and hubris. Ryuk's laughter fades into the wind, gentle, amused, eternal, whispering that nothing truly ends it, only changes names. Fact 61. The Death Note itself is less a tool and more a mirror, a surface onto which every soul projects its truest desire. It does not tempt through greed or cruelty, but through possibility, whispering that justice is achievable if only one holds the courage to decide who deserves to live. Oba once said the notebook was the purest neutral object in the story, and that purity is its corruption. It offers no emotion, no motive, no bias, only response. Whatever evil it creates is already within its user, reflected back in immaculate black ink, exact and merciless. Fact 62. Each rule of the Death Note was designed to simulate moral gravity, every restriction suggesting consequence, every loophole promising temptation. The more rules the reader learns, the more complex the illusion of control becomes, until knowledge itself feels like safety. But knowledge, in Death Note, is quicksand. The deeper one studies, the faster one sinks. Light treats the rules as scripture. L treats them as math. Neither sees that the notebook's power lies not in what it can do, but in how it makes people believe they are immune to its spiritual cost. Fact 63. The most haunting rule that the Death Note cannot kill those whose names are misspelled 4 times is both absurd and profound. It suggests that error itself protects life, that imperfection is divine. Perfection, in this story, is fatal because it removes the natural friction of being human. To misspell, to hesitate, to doubt, these are the boundaries of mercy. Light's handwriting is flawless. L's is not. The rule, hidden among dozens, quietly declares that mistakes are sacred, that flaws are what keep gods human and humans from becoming monsters. Fact 64. In a rare interview, Oba revealed that he viewed the Death Note as a metaphor for modern power, legal systems, politics, algorithms, anything that claims objectivity but serves the will of those who wield it. Light's world is one where surveillance and judgment merge, where data becomes deity. The notebook's mechanical precision mirrors bureaucracy itself, impartial on paper, devastating in practice. Light doesn't invent injustice, he automates it. And in doing so, the story predicts a future where technology would judge humanity faster than any god could. Cold, efficient, and absolutely certain. Fact 65. The Death Note's first written line, "The human whose name is written in this note shall die," is both prophecy and thesis. It is written in the passive voice, devoid of agency. It doesn't name the killer, only the act. That ambiguity is everything. It absolves its user, erases responsibility, replaces choice with ritual. Light becomes executioner without identity, murderer without guilt. Each written name becomes a prayer said backward, a sanctified act of control disguised as destiny. The sentence's grammar, simple and eternal, becomes the story's heartbeat, steady, emotionless, divine in its indifference. Fact 66. Obata drew the Death Note's pages with extraordinary detail, every letter uniform, every line perfectly spaced to create the illusion that writing within it feels sacred. In his notes, he said he wanted each name to look ritualistic, as though written in prayer, not anger. The handwriting becomes ceremony, and Light, the priest of a dark religion. Readers notice that Light's pen never shakes, even when his world crumbles. That steadiness is his curse. He never doubts the ritual, only the world around it. His perfection becomes the truest sign of his spiritual death. Fact 67. The act of writing in the Death Note transforms thought into consequence faster than language can process morality. It bypasses the human delay, the moment between judgment and action, where empathy could intervene. That missing hesitation is the story's greatest horror. It's not that the notebook kills, it's that it removes the space for reflection. Oba described it as a weapon of absolute efficiency. To write is to will, to think is to kill. The notebook collapses the distance between imagination and impact, showing that humanity's danger is not violence itself, but convenience. Fact 68. Every user of the Death Note experiences physical changes, subtle signs of decay. Light's eyes narrow, his face sharpens, his smile becomes controlled. Misa's expressions dull. Her pupils widen unnaturally, a sign of exhaustion. Even Rem and Ryuk are drawn with exaggerated skeletal features when they hover near humans who write. Obata said this was to show the body, remembering the sin the mind denies. Power corrodes even when unseen. The longer one writes, the more the self becomes paper flat, fragile, a surface for something else to speak through. Fact 69. The rule that allows one to set specific causes of death exposes the human hunger for narrative control. Killing becomes not punishment, but authorship. Light doesn't just judge, he edits. He writes deaths like prose, intricate, beautiful, purposeful. The story reveals its meta layer here. Light is an author. The Death Note, his manuscript, the world, his story. Yet every writer eventually meets their ending, written by another hand. Ryuk, the truest narrator, simply closes the book. In the end, Light's greatest creation is not his new world, but his own myth, penned in hubris. Fact 70. When Ryuk finally writes Light's name, the notebook itself becomes symmetrical, its first page and last mirroring each other perfectly, a visual palindrome of fate. The story begins and ends with the same act, the same pen, the same stillness. But this time, the one who believed himself immortal becomes subject to his own design. The ink glows softly in that final scene, the page turning with a sound almost tender. Ryuk smiles, not in malice, but in understanding that power always returns to where it began, and that even gods die by their own handwriting. Fact 71. The partnership between Tsugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata was deliberately anonymous, their identities concealed even from each other during early collaboration. Oba, the writer, sent storyboards filled with sparse dialogue and philosophical direction, while Obata translated those skeletal concepts into striking, emotional visuals. Their process mirrored the series itself, logic meeting intuition, unseen hands shaping morality. Editors at Weekly Shonen Jump called their workflow controlled distance, a balance that preserved mystery. The anonymity fed the mythos of Death Note itself, a story about invisible authors of destiny, written by creators who hid behind their own shadows. Fact 72. Takeshi Obata's art style evolved during serialization to follow Light's psychological decay. Early chapters used clean panels, clear line work, and strong symmetry. The world appeared rational, untouched by corruption. As Light's power grew, Obata distorted perspective subtly, ceilings tilted, shadows lengthened, eyes sharpened. The backgrounds became darker, grainier, as if the light in Light's name were being consumed panel by panel. Obata called this gradual stylistic shift visual entropy, a way to let the art itself deteriorate as morality dissolved, until by the end, the pages looked less like order and more like confession. Fact 73. Oba's writing technique was structured like a chess game, each plot arc designed in numbered moves, often with up to 5 endings planned simultaneously. He would decide the emotional winner and the intellectual winner separately before writing. For instance, Light might win strategically but lose thematically. This dual outcome method allowed Death Note to feel unpredictable but inevitable, every victory echoing with unseen defeat. Oba once said he thought of Light and L as two equations that will never balance, their confrontation meant to produce not resolution, but continuous tension, the heartbeat that defines the story's rhythm. Fact 74. The editorial team at Weekly Shonen Jump initially doubted the series' potential, fearing it was too intellectual for mainstream audiences. Yet within 3 months of serialization, Death Note became one of the magazine's highest-ranked titles. Letters poured in from students, lawyers, and even philosophy professors praising its moral depth. Oba remarked that success proved something simple. People like to question rules, even the ones they obey. The editors later admitted that the risk had redefined Jump's boundaries, paving the way for mature psychological thrillers to stand beside classic battle shonen epics. Fact 75. The concept of the Death Note's rules evolved constantly during production. Some rules were written just to complicate Light's logic. Others, like the 13-day rule, later revealed as fake, were editorial experiments to keep readers off balance. Oba wanted the notebook to feel alive, not mystical, but bureaucratic, filled with frustrating contradictions that mirrored human law. Every new rule was an ethical question disguised as text, making the notebook itself a narrative device that controlled pacing. Each edition built tension not through power, but through uncertainty, as if morality were being redrafted in real time. Fact 76. The anime adaptation, directed by Tetsuro Araki and produced by Madhouse, captured the manga's intensity with cinematic precision. Araki used dramatic lighting and still frame composition inspired by noir film. Every episode carried a color theme: red for conflict, blue for logic, gold for temptation. The pacing relied on deliberate silence, long pauses between dialogue to simulate thought, allowing tension to breathe. Araki said he wanted the anime to feel like Insomnia, a show you can't stop watching even when your body begs for rest, mirroring Light's own obsessive descent into sleepless control. Fact 77. Mamoru Miyano, who voiced Light in the anime, used a unique breathing technique while recording, exhaling slightly through each line to give Light's words the controlled rhythm of a sermon. He described the performance as speaking with a smile you can't trust. Kappei Yamaguchi, L's voice actor, recorded many of his lines in a crouched position to stay physically in character. When both actors performed their final confrontation, they were instructed not to look at each other, preserving the tension that existed between their characters' intimacy created through separation. Fact 78. The Death Note anime's soundtrack, composed by Yoshihisa Hirano and Hideki Taniguchi, blends Baroque orchestration with industrial rhythm, representing the clash of intellect and chaos. The recurring choral motif, Kyrie, was written to mimic a distorted prayer, reverent yet blasphemous. The music's Latin phrases are intentionally nonsensical, sound before meaning, designed to evoke the grandeur of divine ritual, emptied of sincerity. Hirano said he wanted the score to feel like a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. Every crescendo mirrors Light's ego expanding, every silence his conscience fading into divine delusion. Fact 79. The live-action films introduced subtle reinterpretations that deepened the story's ambiguity. In the 2006 Japanese duology, Light is portrayed with visible empathy early on, making his fall more tragic than tyrannical. The films conclude with L's death as self-sacrifice, rewriting the rivalry into mutual recognition. These changes were controversial but deliberate, exploring how the same premise can reveal different moral outcomes depending on tone. Even flawed adaptations preserve Death Note's essence, that the line between good and evil shifts depending on who holds the pen. Fact 80. Obata and Oba's later collaboration, Bakuman, serves as a quiet spiritual sequel to Death Note. It tells the story of two young manga artists chasing perfection, unknowingly echoing Light and L's pursuit of intellectual immortality. The characters discuss Death Note within the story itself, turning creation into reflection. Obata once said, "We wrote Death Note as fear and Bakuman as forgiveness." It's a confession that art can only exorcise what it once created. Through Bakuman, they reimagined what happens when the hunger for greatness finally softens into peace. Fact 81. Death Note transcended its medium almost immediately after publication, becoming a global phenomenon studied not just as entertainment, but as philosophy. Universities across Japan, Europe, and the United States began teaching it in courses about ethics and law. Professors used Light's actions to discuss utilitarianism, justice, and moral relativism, arguing that Kira's world reflects the psychological allure of authoritarian order. The series gave language to modern anxiety, the idea that righteousness and cruelty can wear the same face. It showed that moral collapse rarely begins with hatred. It begins with the quiet confidence of being right. Fact 82. The word Kira, derived from the English killer, became more than a name, it became ideology. In the story, it spreads like faith, anonymous and viral, feeding on collective disillusionment. Online, fans adopted it as identity, using Kira handles and symbols in debates about punishment and privacy. Oba said he wrote this aspect to explore the digital worship of invisible gods. The cult of Kira foreshadows internet-age morality, leaderless, faceless, self-justifying. In fiction and in fandom alike, Death Note predicted the coming era where belief spreads faster than truth ever could. Fact 83. Lel's silhouette, hunched, barefoot, blank-eyed, became a cultural icon. His posture was used in advertisements, fan art, and even real-world design motifs. Psychologists later cited L as a case study in neurodivergent representation, interpreting his mannerisms as expressions of sensory focus and emotional isolation. He became a symbol not of strangeness, but of authenticity, someone who moves differently because he thinks differently. Oba never confirmed any diagnosis, saying only that L exists at the edge of human understanding. The world, he suggested, will always need people who refuse to sit normally. Fact 84. In Japan, several schools banned Death Note manga in the late 2000s after students began creating imitation notebooks, writing down the names of teachers or classmates as pranks. These incidents revealed the power of symbols, how fiction, when too precise, blurs into ritual. The ban sparked debates about censorship and responsibility, with some educators defending the manga as a moral lesson rather than a danger. Oba's response was characteristically detached. If readers are afraid of what they write, then they have already learned what Light did not. The notebook's warning became self-fulfilling prophecy. Fact 85. Death Note's reach extended into politics and media. Journalists in several countries used the term Kira complex to describe vigilante justice in real-life citizens taking punishment into their own hands. The series inadvertently gave vocabulary to moral extremism, forcing society to ask whether justice, once privatized, ever remains just. Oba said this was his greatest discomfort with the work, that Light's charisma could make tyranny seductive. Yet perhaps that unease is the point. Death Note was never a story about good defeating evil, but about how easily good becomes its reflection. Fact 86. Psychologists studying audience reactions to Death Note found that viewers' sympathy often shifts from L to Light based on personal ideology. Those who valued order tended to side with Light. Those who valued curiosity preferred L. The experiment showed that moral interpretation is not universal, that the story functions as a mirror. Oba structured the plot to maintain that ambiguity, refusing to give explicit authorial judgment. In his words, the reader becomes the Death Note. Each page invites judgment, and every reader, consciously or not, writes a name inside their own mind. Fact 87. The anime's global release through early streaming platforms made it one of the first Japanese series to achieve massive international fandom. Subtitles and fan translations spread within days of airing, creating cross-cultural discussions about ethics, theology, and fate. In the West, Death Note was often viewers' first exposure to philosophical anime, reshaping perceptions of what animation could explore. For many, it marked the beginning of a more contemplative era in anime storytelling, a bridge between entertainment and existentialism, between narrative and meditation. Fact 88. Critics have compared Death Note to Western literary traditions, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Milton's Paradise Lost, and even Shakespeare's tragedies. Light Yagami, like Raskolnikov or Macbeth, embodies the intellectual who rationalizes sin into virtue. Yet Death Note modernizes that descent by making his weapon bureaucracy itself. His crimes require no blood, only ink, no confrontation, only paperwork. This bureaucratic evil mirrors the 20th century's moral crises, where genocide was often executed through systems, not swords. The story reminds us that modern monstrosity rarely looks monstrous, it looks efficient. Fact 89. The Netflix adaptation in 2017, though widely criticized, demonstrated the universality of the concept. By transplanting the story to Seattle and reimagining Light as a disaffected teenager rather than a genius, the film accidentally exposed what made the original sacred restraint. The adaptation replaced calculation with chaos, proving that Death Note's terror comes not from violence, but from quiet thought. Even in failure, it revealed something profound. Some stories are not meant to be louder, they are meant to whisper. The film reminded audiences that imitation without understanding is its own kind of death. Fact 90. The influence of Death Note endures across generations of storytelling, from Code Geass to Attack on Titan, from Psycho-Pass to Parasite. Each inherited its moral architecture, the charismatic anti-hero, the ethical labyrinth, the question of whether peace built on fear can ever last. Oba and Obata's creation reshaped narrative expectations, teaching both writers and audiences that intellect could be as thrilling as combat and silence, more violent than war. 2 decades later, Death Note remains both mirror and prophecy, proof that stories about death are really stories about the human need to believe we are right. Fact 91. As the story closes, Death Note reveals its truest shape, not as a tale of good and evil, but as a meditation on the fragility of human morality when faced with limitless power. The notebook is gone, the players dead or forgotten, yet the silence that follows feels heavier than the noise that came before. Ryuk returns to his world unchanged, his grin wide and empty, because for him, nothing ever truly ends. The human world was only a moment's entertainment, but for those who lived within it, that moment was eternity, a lifetime burned into ink. Fact 92. Light's death scene, long analyzed and endlessly debated, is not written as punishment, but as awakening. In those final seconds, stripped of his followers and delusions, he runs not from justice, but from himself. He sees, for the first time, the enormity of what he has become. The vision of L standing before him is not haunting, but forgiving, as though his rival's calm gaze invites him to rest. When Ryuk writes his name, Light does not protest the way mortals do. He sighs. The last sound of his life is not fear, but release and exhale after too much certainty. Fact 93. Ryuk's role as final witness completes the circle of detachment. From the first to the last page, he has done nothing but watch, and in his indifference lies the story's cruel wisdom that the universe does not judge. Death, in Death Note, is not retribution, it is rhythm. Ryuk's laughter at the end is not mockery, but continuity, the sound of existence resetting, of another notebook waiting to fall. His grin is eternal, not because he is cruel, but because he understands what humanity cannot, that chaos and order are the same melody, played in different keys. Fact 94. The quiet epilogue, farmers in a field, the world moving on, is often overlooked, but it is the most profound image of all. After gods and geniuses vanish, life continues. Rice still grows, clouds still move. The camera pulls away from judgment to show what remains unchanged, the ordinary pulse of human endurance. Oba said he wanted readers to feel the peace of insignificance, the truth that the world survives without heroes, villains, or divine order. In the end, justice was never universal. It was just noise between two silences. Fact 95. The unnamed girl leading the Kira candle ceremony in the manga's final pages represents faith's persistence, humanity's refusal to let go of myth, even when it has proven false. Her prayer is not to light, but to meaning itself. The flickering candles echo the notebook's pages, small lights of belief trembling in an indifferent universe. Obata drew the scene in near total darkness, each flame isolated by heavy ink. It is the closest the series comes to mercy, a moment where ignorance becomes comfort, where the act of believing itself is what keeps the world from collapsing. Fact 96. Oba once admitted that he never viewed light as villain or hero, but as a human who lost his reflection. The Death Note removed his shadow, his ability to see himself through others. Without that mirror, morality dissolves. His tragedy is not the murders, but the loneliness that made them possible. Power stripped him of companionship, of empathy, of the shared gaze that defines existence. By the time he dies, he no longer knows who he is speaking to. He became what all gods become when worshipped, too long silent, isolated, and already forgotten. Fact 97. The absence of a true afterlife in Death Note is deliberate. Oba designed the cosmology to end in nothingness. Humans who die go to Mu, a void beyond comprehension. This philosophy rejects traditional reward or punishment, turning morality inward. It forces every judgment to matter in life, not beyond it. There is no redemption waiting after the final breath, no divine audit, only the echo of choices made and forgotten. In that emptiness lies the story's deepest grace, a universe without absolution, yet still full of humans who try to create meaning anyway. Fact 98. L's legacy endures, not through victory, but through remembrance. The world forgets his name, but not his method. Nier inherits his logic, Mellow his fire, but neither his empathy. L's greatest gift was not deduction, but doubt, the willingness to question even himself. In a story filled with certainty, he is the one who remains curious. His death leaves a vacuum, and that vacuum is the soul of the narrative, the space where morality once lived. The world continues to seek his shadow, not because he was perfect, but because he was human enough to wonder. Fact 99. In its final form, Death Note becomes a fable about creation itself. Light is the author who cannot stop writing, the reader who cannot stop interpreting, the believer who cannot stop believing. Every person who holds the notebook becomes both God and audience, writing reality while being read by it. The act of storytelling mirrors the act of killing, each word defining, limiting, finalizing. Yet the beauty of the manga is that it admits this openly. Fiction, like power, is always manipulation. To write is to judge, and to judge is to become mortal once more. Fact 100. The final image of death. Note the silent sky above a sleeping world is the story's only answer. After all the noise, the questions, the philosophies, there is only quiet. The gods have gone home, the mortals have stopped praying, and what remains is equilibrium. It is not justice, nor peace, it is stillness. A world that no longer believes in perfect judgment begins, at last, to live again. The notebook closes, the ink dries, and somewhere far above, Ryuk laughs one last time softly, eternally, as the universe exhales and begins another dream.